Do you want to grow a pothos plant with leaves that are bigger than your head? Let me show you how. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, but more on that in a jiffy. So the first thing we need to understand is their natural growth habit. Pothos are climbers. They scramble along the forest floor of the jungle until they find a tree to climb up. They do this by digging in their aerial roots into the bark and hoisting themselves higher and higher until they get better access to sunlight. It's the vitamin D that they crave. As they climb, they mature, with the leaves getting bigger and bigger and eventually fenestrated. So to get these big leaves at home, we need to mimic this as much as possible. I've had this mixed pothos planter for well over 2 years now, and as you can see, the leaves are still pretty small. This guy on the other hand, I've had for about 1.5 years, and just look at the leaves. Like I say, bigger than my head. The difference is obvious now that we know how these guys want to grow. This one is left to hang and sprawl, which is fine, it still looks nice, but because this one has something to climb up, he's starting to behave as if he was in the jungle. And to show you just how much these plants want to climb, have a look here. I did nothing to encourage this. The stem just inched along and started to climb the wall on its own accord. There are a few options for supporting your pothos, but the one that's going to get you the fastest and most reliable results is a moss pole. If you're not familiar, then a moss pole is simply a cage of some description, a plastic cage in my case, filled with sphagnum moss. The idea is that you park the moss-filled cage up against the bum of a vining plant and it will grow up it like it would a tree in the jungle. The reason that moss poles are quick and reliable for getting massive leaves is because how they coax the aerial roots out of the plant and encourage them to turn into proper roots that supply extra moisture and nutrients to the plant. This is the secret to explosive growth. Without moisture, aerial roots will just do their basic job of supporting the plant, kind of like anchors the plant uses to hoist itself up. But if they get consistent moisture from damp moss, the plant takes advantage and they grow into proper roots. Have you ever popped a pothos or monstera cutting in water and watched how the aerial root turned into the established root system of that new plant? It's exactly the same here, and we get all the benefits those extra roots provide. So think of the moss pole as an extension of the main root system in the pot, and the more roots there are, the stronger the plant will become. So how do we actually start one of these up? Well, it's actually dead simple. The tricky part is the ongoing care and what to do when the plant reaches the top, but we will cover all that in a bit, don't worry. The first thing to say is don't bother with these, not if you want large leaves. They're fine, they support the plant and the leaves will get a little bigger, but proper moss poles are better. So the first thing you need is a cage. Lots of folks use cages made of mesh or chicken wire, but I've opted for these plastic cages. They're simple, easy to find online, and don't dry out super quick. Plus they stack relatively easily. Fill it with sphagnum moss. Again, this is easy to find online and you will probably need to hydrate it by soaking it in a bucket of water. While I'm doing that, are you looking to build a beautiful website, start an online store, or even create a portfolio to showcase your work? If you are, then today's video sponsor Squarespace has everything you need. I've been using Squarespace to set up and then manage my website for a good couple of years now, and I really have found it a breeze to use. They've got tons of templates to help you get started, and their grid system lets you drop in any text and images you need to create a stunning website in just minutes. Squarespace gives you powerful analytics and marketing tools to help you grow your online presence, plus you've got AI to call on to help you easily create your website. It really is dead easy to use. Head to squarespace.com to start your free trial today. And when you're ready to launch, use code Sheffield for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Now, if you look at when this chappie was a wee lad, you'll notice that I actually filled the cage with soil. Don't do that. This was an experiment and it does create an almighty mess, so stick to moss. Next is prepping your plant. It's best to go small here. You don't want to have to try and fix a really long stem to the pole, it's a waste of potential. It's much better to start with a short piece so that the aerial roots can start latching on nice and early. You'll need to find a pot that is big enough for the pole and the plant. Don't worry if it's a tight squeeze for the roots, the moss pole will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting from now on. Pop everything in the pot and backfill with soil. Try not to bury the plant too much, but try to get the stem as near to the pole as possible. And you want the leaves to face away from the pole and the back of the stem, where the aerial roots are, to be pressed up against the pole. Pack the soil around the pole quite firmly to stop it wobbling about too. Now that everything is in, it's just a matter of tying the stem to the pole. It can all look a bit janky at first, but once the plant starts to grow, it will naturally start to climb up the pole, so you shouldn't need to tie it in much more than a couple of times. Give the pot and the pole a good drink and wait for the magic to happen. So I've showed you how to set one of these up, and I'll show you what happens when the plant reaches the top of the pole, but first we just need to ground ourselves with a couple of reality checks. Moss poles are not all sunshine and roses, and before you go off and embark on this adventure, I want you to be aware of the challenges before you angrily come after me in 6 months' time. Moss poles need a lot of care and attention, much more so than a typical plant. You might water your plant, say once a week, and be done with it, but for these guys you're probably looking at 2 or 3 or even more times a week. Moss dries out super quick, especially in a long thin cage, and we want it to stay nice and damp for the roots to be happy. So this means pouring water in for it to trickle its way through the pole multiple times a week. But honestly, this is a bit of an exact science in itself. Too little and not all the pole will be damp, and too much and you've got a swamp in the pot that you'll need to deal with. Which is fine when the plant is still small, but not so much when they're stacked. I mentioned that you shouldn't need to tie in the plant more than a couple of times once everything's all established, and this is true, but you will still need to nurse it somewhat. The stem loves nothing more than to veer off track, trying to find its own way to the promised land. So you need to be on the lookout so that this kind of wasted potential is avoided. Then we have stability issues. Once you start to stack moss poles on top, they sure do get top heavy. When the plant grows more and more leaves, the whole thing becomes heavy at the front, so gravity does its job and chucks the whole thing on the floor. I can't tell you the number of times I found one of these face down on the floor in the morning. I've now learned that these should be leaning back slightly to counter the leaves on the front, but you're still asking for trouble if you stack so many together. And then we have fungus gnats. It's my hunch that these little tyrants love moss more than they do soil, and trust me, they love soil, especially in my house. Normally when I repot a plant, it takes at least a couple of weeks for them to turn up, but with moss poles it seems to take only hours. And really, there's not much I can do about it either. My normal solution is beneficial nematodes, but they're not really going to work on these. The next piece of the puzzle that does come with a lot of challenges is knowing what to do when the plant reaches the top. Now, if you're only on your first moss pole and the plant is near the top, then the solution is relatively simple. Fill another pole with moss and plonk it on top. Nice and simple. But what do you do when you've already stacked a few on top and you've got nowhere left to go? You know, the ceiling and all that. A problem I'm experiencing with this guy. It's called the chop and extend. Now before doing this, you want to make sure that there are a healthy number of roots in the pot. If there aren't, then the chop and extend is likely going to fail. It has for me before. So as I mentioned earlier, the pole has become an extension of the pot. This means the plant is less reliant on the initial root system it had. We can use this to our advantage and cut the stem on the plant near the bottom of the top pole. We can do this because all along this stem, the plant has grown roots into the moss, and basically it won't die. This is why we need to check that there are a good number of roots in there before making the cut. So make the cut and try to prise the top moss pole off. It will be a spaghetti party in there, so it might be a bit of a challenge to separate them. Once it's loose, you're then basically at square one again, but with a much more mature plant. Keep growing and extending and growing and extending, and the possibilities are endless. When potting on this top piece, you'll probably have to cut free a leaf or two so that they're not sitting in damp soil, and I would go for a nice sturdy pot to support all the weight that the plant will put on. So this piece is now the main plant. Now obviously we've just cut away quite a lot of root tissue, so we should expect to see some reaction from the plant. The next couple of leaves might be smaller than the latest one, but once it's settled in and growing roots again, it will perk up. So it is up to you whether you can stomach the extra work and hassle that moss poles bring. If you ask me, it's worth having at least 1 or 2 in your home to have the standout pieces. Any more than that though and it starts to get annoying. Now all of this wouldn't work half as well if the plant wasn't getting bright light. If this moss pole was at the back of my living room for example, I don't think the leaves would be quite as big as this. This window faces southwest and this plant is as close to it as possible. When he's not being filmed, his leaves are actually facing the light with his bum facing the room. And this isn't ideal for aesthetics, but it does ensure the best growth. If it was the other way around, then the stem would be wanting to veer off course in search of the light and then would be in a world of bother. So the aim of the game is to pick a bright spot and leave it there. No jigging around. Let me know if you've got any plants on moss poles and how you're finding it. And for your next viewing pleasure, watch this video next.